How strange that the nature of life is change, yet the nature of human beings is to resist change. And how ironic that the difficult times we fear might ruin us are the very ones that can break us open and help us blossom into who we were meant to be.
And our second reading is by Unitarian Universalist minister Reverend Mary Wellemeyer. She titled her poem, The End. It's hard to believe it is finished. She was so full of life and fun until just before the end, keeping track of people, enjoying the outdoors, caring for family, all of it. Something came for her. She did not want to go. She denied the summons, fighting this final truth of her life. We did not want it either. But then we had not seen the summoning presence. We did not know. When she relaxed and got ready to leave, we all felt strange, awkward, wondering. It was so sudden. But she was fine, no longer here. of the gems of this congregation. In the fall of 1990, a group of Jewish delegates traveled to Dharamshala, a remote hill town in northern India. They went to meet with His Holiness the Dalai Lama of Tibet. As you know, the Chinese occupied Tibet in 1950, and in 1959, after Chinese forces crushed an uprising by the Tibetans, the Dalai Lama fled to northern India, where he lives in exile with 130,000 refugees, many monks, nuns, and other members of the Tibetan Buddhist community. You can read the story of the Jewish delegation's meeting with the Dalai Lama in Roger Kamenetz's book titled The Jew in the Lotus. Susan Goldsmith turned me onto it. It's a wonderful book. Kamenetz writes that he agreed to travel with the Jewish delegation because I'd never been to India before, and the idea of schlepping mezuzahs and matzahs through remote corners of the Punjab appealed to me. Now, why would a group of observant Jews travel to northern India to meet with the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhists? What could they possibly have in common? In truth, it was the Dalai Lama who extended the invitation. In his eyes, Jews are survival experts. The very center of Jewish religious life, the temple in Jerusalem, was razed to the ground now 2,000 years ago. And since then, Jews have enjoyed some periods of peace punctuated by persecution, inquisition, pogrom, and Holocaust, and still, Judaism lives on. To the Dalai Lama, Jewish history with all its traumas is relevant to his own people. Tell me your secret, he says, the secret of the Jewish spiritual survival in exile. Can you imagine the challenge of guiding people through such a time of change? It can be hard enough finding a way through the changes in our own lives, never mind leading an entire people. We all know something of change in our lives. It seems that we have a love-hate relationship with it. On the one hand, we can't seem to change fast enough. Case in point, let's have a show of hands from those of you who have lived in Arizona your entire lives. That is maybe 10 maximum. Counting you. On average, Americans move about 12 times in a lifetime. That's on average. For those of you here who went to college, how many of you are working in or retired from a job related to your college major? Okay, a better number. Yeah. On average, most college students change their major field of study at least 3 times. And given those of us who did not raise our hands, I think it's safe to say college graduation wasn't the end of our vocational transitions. How many of you have ever worked for one employer for 20 years or more? Okay, maybe a dozen and a half, maybe 20. Well, given current trends, the average American millennial, those born between 1977 and 1997, will hold between 15 and 20 different jobs in their working lifetime. And I'm not going to ask how many of you have exceeded this next average, but on average, American marriages last 8 years. Now, Smoot and Charlotte. They're bringing up the average. That's great. So yes, many of us have moved to new states, changed jobs, begun and ended relationships with a level of regularity that would probably have astonished people a century ago. You could say we kind of like change. But on the other hand, the conventional wisdom holds that we resist change. Our opening words today, how strange that the nature of life is change, writes Lesser, yet the nature of human beings is to resist change. We could all tell a few stories about how people resist change. A few weeks ago, I was in Chicago and I toured Frank Lloyd Wright's Robie House on the campus of the University of Chicago. To my eye, it is a thing of beauty. far ahead of its time, with long, clean lines and lovely expanses of glass. But when Wright first built it, the neighbors saw it as a hideous monstrosity in an otherwise genteel neighborhood. Why, you couldn't even tell where the front door was, people complained. What was he thinking? And in many faith communities, probably some of you have experienced this, nothing raises more controversy than purchasing a new hymnal. Why were so many beautiful songs left out of the new hymnal, and where did they find some of those awful new ones? We forget, of course, that the beautiful songs we love were once awful new ones to the generation before us. When I was a kid, my older brothers were in constant battle with Mom and Dad over the length of their hair. It was the era of shag carpet and even shaggier hairstyles. My parents couldn't afford the innovation of shag carpet, and they certainly didn't want shaggy hairstyles on their 7 boys. 2 weeks ago, we all gathered in Ohio to celebrate Mom's 80th birthday. There were 32 of us with the grandchildren. We did a lot of laughing and told a few slightly exaggerated tales, and we remembered together the twists and turns of my mom's amazing life. And when the subject of long hair came up, as it did, she just sat there and shook her head and wondered why she and Dad had made such a fuss about it. It didn't seem very important anymore. So what's the verdict? Do we love change, or do we hate it? In his book, The Way of Transition, William Bridges takes a much deeper look at our response to change in life. He argues that people do not resist change. What we resist is transition. Transition and change are words that we often use as synonyms for one another, but really they aren't, he argues. Change is a situational shift. You move to a bigger house down the street, or to the next state, or across the country to Phoenix, which my friends in Philly once called God's kitty litter box. Now that's a change. Or you're laid off from a job, or you get a promotion, or you find a new job. These are changes, situational changes. You get married, perhaps divorced, maybe you begin dating after a long break. These are all changes. Someone you love dies, as in Wellemeyer's poem that I read earlier. That's a big change. Transition, on the other hand, is the process of letting go of the way things used to be, and then taking hold of the way things subsequently have become. In between the letting go and the taking hold, Bridge writes, there's this chaotic, potentially creative neutral zone, when things aren't the old way, but they aren't a new way yet either. The process of ending, neutral zone, and beginning again, this is what we so often resist. Tell me your secret, the Dalai Lama says, the secret of Jewish spiritual survival in exile. Tibetan Buddhists had experienced a change, all right, a change that came against their will. The question is how to respond, what to do about this change of situation that has come into their lives. Will they now resist the process of transition, which the change requires? Yes, at times we resist the process of letting go. Nearly 30 years ago, as a college junior, I spent a semester studying Jordan, Israel, the West Bank, and Egypt. For several months, I lived inside the old city of Jerusalem, and every morning and evening I looked out from my balcony across the ancient city to the Dome of the Rock, the Wailing Wall. Couldn't see the Wailing Wall, but knew exactly where it was, and a little further down to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Now, as a child growing up in Ohio in a conservative Christian family, I cut my teeth on biblical stories about Kings David and Solomon. We read how the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem, taking her people into exile. And then we read some more a little later about how they struggled to rebuild the city after they returned from Babylon. In my home, of course, there were always the stories of Jesus' comings and goings from the city as well. The stories held a sort of mythic character in our minds, that place way over there somewhere where all these things happened. And while the reality of Jerusalem does hold a certain beauty, a certain mystique, if you will, in a political sense, the old city is actually quite gritty. Just inside the Damascus Gate is the Muslim quarter of the city, and when you walk down the cobblestone street, you'll see falafel stands on one side and people selling figs and pomegranates and grapes on the other, and all manner of olive wood carvings and needlepoint and gold and silver jewelry right along cheap tourist t-shirts and shot glasses. It's all mixed together. But at the first major arch over the cobblestone street of the Via Dolorosa that you come in the Damascus Gate is a home that is reportedly owned by former Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, which has several huge Israeli flags draped over the arch, young soldiers standing nearby in case of any trouble from the locals who resent this Jewish incursion into the Muslim part of the city. And as the semester wore on, we met with rabbis and imams and priests and politicians, soldiers, archaeologists, and historians. And the mythic quality of Jerusalem that I held in my mind slowly dissolved into the day-to-day reality of this conflicted city. Given the choice, I think, I was 20 at the time, I might have preferred not knowing the harsh reality. The image of Jerusalem in my head was much more lovely. At times, we resist the letting go stage of transition. You can see this also when the room of a loved one who died remains just as it was, though they have been gone for 3 years. It's painful letting go. Jennifer Donnelly says it well. I want a word that describes the feeling that you get, a cold, sick feeling deep down inside when you know something is happening that will change you, and you don't want it to, but you can't stop it. And you know for the first time, for the very first time, that there will now be a before and an after, a was and a will be, and that you will never again quite be the same person as you were. Some of you may relate to the 6-month-old who is up throughout the night, at times seemingly inconsolable, and you longed for the time when you actually got a full night of sleep. The child is a blessing, but what happened to the easygoing life that I had before? At times, we resist the letting go stage. But when we really do begin to let go, that messy neutral zone isn't exactly a walk in the park. The relationship is over. He moved out of the house and we've sold it. The change has taken place. And yes, I'm learning to let go, but now what? I feel lost. I feel unmoored. I'm almost not sure of who I am as a single person. I'm so used to being as a part of a couple. I keep running into things that we would have worked through together, and now this neutral zone, it's for the birds. Yes, I'm letting go, but I'm kind of lost in the middle. In Cassandra Clare's novel, Clockwork Angel, the main character talks about this neutral zone. She says, sometimes our lives can change so fast, change outpaces our minds and our hearts. It's those times, I think, when our lives have been altered, but we still long for the time before everything changed. That is when we feel the greatest pain. I can tell you, though, she continues, from experience, you grow accustomed to it. You learn to live your new life. And you can't imagine after a while, or even quite remember, how things were before. But it takes time coming to terms with that neutral zone. And at times, we also resist fully taking hold of the new reality. You finally succeeded in getting a new job after 18 months of unemployment, but there are things they expect you to know and to do in this new job that, frankly, you're unprepared for. You didn't have to do that in your old job. Or after working your entire adult life, you're retired, learning to enjoy a more relaxed pace. But what now? Maybe I should use the time to write. I always said I was going to write. I've got plenty of time now. Everyone keeps telling me I should volunteer somewhere, but do I really want to commit myself to something new? I'm just getting used to being in charge of my schedule. What if they want me to come at a time when I don't feel like coming? At times, we resist fully taking hold of a new reality in our lives. Does any of this ring true at all to you? I wonder what it would be like if we were each to make a list of the significant transitions that we have experienced in our lives. A list which included things like, what did you have to let go of that at one point was incredibly meaningful? We might continue by talking about how you made it through that chaotic and creative neutral zone. And we could close off each chapter with, what new things did you begin to take hold of after you let go of the old and spent a time in that cocoon period? The beautiful thing about being part of a community such as this is that we are not alone going through the changes and the transitions of our lives. On any given day when you're struggling with a transition in your life, chances are very good that someone else in this room is going through something very similar. We need not be alone here. We can break out of patterns of walking through transition by ourselves. It can be difficult to talk about the pain of letting go. It can be more disorienting to find words for that in-between stage when something that meant something prior doesn't mean that anymore and aren't quite sure where we are. But we need not be alone in these transitions. One of the gifts of choosing to be part of a community like this is the relationships that can develop. Relationships that hold incredible promise for each of us as we walk through the normal transitions of life. As our kids are now beginning to go back to school and the season of travel begins to wind down, I invite you to invest yourself more fully in this community. Whether you've been coming for a month or you've been here since the early 70s, there are amazing possibilities that exist here in developing deeper relationships. We have these small groups that will be starting up shortly, 6 or 8 people. You'll have a chance to get to know people in a new and deeper way. This was the first thing that I did when I started here. I was scared to death, and it was an awesome experience. There are some amazing classes being offered this year. Some of them just 1 session, others 4 sessions or 6 sessions, and a couple of classes go through the whole year. I'll put in a shameless plug for the class that Susan Goldsmith and I are going to be leading on developing spiritual practices. And if you talk with Reverend Linda, who was up here, or during the week, Heidi in the office, Reverend Susan when she returns, they'll be happy to help you brainstorm about where you might find your niche, whether it's in a class or whether it's some bit of volunteering. Because when we spend our lives together, there's tremendous possibility for developing relationships and for having a place to share the transitions that we go through. We need not be alone here. Together, day by day, we are walking the way of transition, each of us in our own lives, sharing our questions, our sorrows, and our joys.
Would the ushers please come forward? Each week we take an offering to sustain and strengthen the ministry of this congregation. I invite you to read with me in unison the words of dedication for our offering. With gratitude for the abundance in our lives, we give for the life and mission of this congregation.